This playthrough won't impress anybody. I attempted the Poland scenario and got absolutely clobbered. But I've never done this one before, and I thought it might be interesting. And I was right. I ended up doing it 3 more times and enjoyed it more with each subsequent go. But I didn't take video of any of those. Those were just for my own amusement. This is just to show what RT3 looks like. So these are the victory conditions. The interface of Railroad Tycoon 3 is really noticeably similar to that of Railroad Tycoon 2. The differences are mostly in functionality, and as I've said already, I'm not entirely convinced that the changes are for the better. And there are a lot of fictional locomotives in Railroad Tycoon 3 that I don't particularly like. But this one is actually authentic. This is a Deutsche Reichsbahn, or DR 132 class diesel that I'm using to replace these South African Red Devil steam locomotives, which I guess they figured approximated the PKP late steam power. In general, the rail network they give you to rebuild is much more primitive than the real PKP of 1993. There's no electrification, a lot of the stations aren't there that are certainly old stations that have always been there, like Poznan and Wrocław. And they're difficult to add because usually the rival players, the AI players, snap those up really fast. And that's somewhat unrealistic because PKP have nevertheless, in spite of privatization of many things in Poland, they've maintained a pretty firm grip on rail transport in Poland. It wasn't a crazy free-for-all in 1993 in that regard either. But what I'm doing here is I'm replacing the steam locomotives with diesels to the extent that I can afford it. Credit is very easy in this scenario, but that can actually entrap you with interest payments, which was ultimately what did me in this scenario. But I also blundered into not building more trains than I did. I really should have spent more money on additional trains and lines rather than modernizing what was already there. That's another pitfall of this particular scenario, because the increase in revenue from, or rather, increase in profit from modernizing PKP is not comparable to what you make by building more trains and lines. Actually, one other thing, if this looks weird to you, it's because the whole map is upside down. At least on screen here. If you look in the lower left, you can see a more conventionally aligned map, north, south, east, west. I didn't even fully realize why everything was in the wrong place when I was doing this, which confused me still further. Eventually I figured out that to not be confused on this map, you have to basically turn it 180 degrees around. And I was groping all over the place. So where am I? Like, what is this? What's the matter? And in hindsight, maybe I should have played it a few times before doing the playthrough. But this gives you an impression of what your first impressions might be if you pick this up. The vast majority of scenarios in Railroad Tycoon 2 are not like this. You generally know what you're about to do. But finally I get around to issuing some bonds to modernize my trains, but as it turned out, this was a mistake. I should have been building new trains and then modernizing. But I had never played this scenario before, as I said. I might go back to it for a subsequent playthrough, just because I decided I actually like it. I might clean it up a little bit, but generally I'm fond of it as is. Now here's where I started making my real blunders, as I started taking out way too much credit for the revenue I was generating, without the prospect of an increase in revenue that would cover it. Now here I'm trying to find a route to Katowice, which has moderate grades, which would also reflect the real thing, and having quite a little bit of difficulty here. One of the things that can really be irritating is that it can be difficult to get the editor, I mean, it's not even the editor, the track layer to fix or modernize a bridge once you've laid it, so I ended up bulldozing bridges, which is hideously expensive. And the grades on the bridges in Railroad Tycoon 3 tend to be unrealistically steep, so you have to redo them far more often than you would have to do in Railroad Tycoon 2. And that loses you money, and it loses you the game, ultimately. Of course, if you practice, you figure out how to get around these problems, but you can see how ridiculous this is. I mean, this is neither realistic nor particularly playable. There, I finally got it. 4% grade, though, just coming off a bridge. It's crazy. I'm trying to get the track to go around to Katowice. Meanwhile, the company is hemorrhaging money. Crazy. There are also a lot of repairs that I haven't done yet because I didn't realize I had to make them. Like, there are missing stations and there's missing track, all kinds of things that you have to fix in this if you really want your network to run properly. So there, I finally got a station in this town I've never heard of in Poland. I've only been to Poland once, not counting a hiking trip over Śnieżka. I've been through Katowice on the train, consequently, but actually what I'm trying to do here is replicate my route, only in the opposite direction into the Czech Republic. And I'm probably getting it wrong, actually, because the topography in Railroad Tycoon 2, at least, was fairly accurate. I'm assuming it's also accurate in Railroad Tycoon 3, if not even more so than in Railroad Tycoon 2. One of the few improvements. But often they don't leave space for track, like along riverbeds and so on, where you would have it in real life. It's precisely because it's relatively flat along a riverbed, usually, compared to the valley that any given line might be going through. So here I'm setting up the train schedule for my first new train. This actually isn't too unlike the setup in Railroad Tycoon 2, although it's hard to go back to such a user-friendly menu. I presume that if I searched long enough I might find it, but it is not a particularly user-friendly interface for working on your trains like it is in Railroad Tycoon 2. And I'm out of time, but in any case I'm losing, as you can already see, because I'm deep in debt and so on. But thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll have something more interesting in the near future.